Welcome, everyone. In this topic, we will focus on how change happens in organizations and how OD helps us manage that change in a planned and disciplined way. We'll begin by clarifying what organizational change means, and we'll discuss the different types and levels of change you can see in real organizations. Then we'll talk about why change is necessary, what makes change difficult, and how leaders and organizations can manage change more effectively. After that, we will shift to planned organizational change, the ideas and frameworks that help us structure change instead of just reacting. Finally, we'll take a closer look at resistance to change, why it happens at the individual and organizational levels, and what organizations can do to overcome it in a respectful and effective way. Let's begin with the big picture. Organizational change happens when the organization shifts how it operates. So, this can be in its structure, processes, people, practices, strategy, or even culture. Change happens because the environment does not stay the same. Markets they shift, technology changes, competition changes, and internal needs even change. And here's the basic reality: organizations that learn and adapt are more likely to survive and succeed, while those that fail to adapt may struggle or disappear. So, change is not optional, it's just part of organizational life. Now, when we talk about the nature of change, it helps us to remember that change can look very different depending on the situation. Some change is planned, meaning the organization anticipates it and prepares for it. Other change is unplanned, meaning the organization is forced to react quickly. Change can also be gradual, like continuous improvement over time, or it can be rapid, like a sudden restructuring in the organization. And it can also be small adjustments or major transformations. This is important because the nature of change affects how people respond, how much disruption happens, and what kind of management approach is needed. Not all change is the same. Some changes are structural, like redesigning departments or reporting relationships. Some changes focus on people, like new roles, new skills, or new performance expectations. Some changes focus on processes, like changing workflows, systems, or procedures. Others focus on strategy, like entering a new market or changing the business model. The type of change matters because it affects how risky the change feels to employees and how much resistance it might create. For example, changes that affect job security often produce stronger emotional reactions than small process changes. Change can happen at different levels as well. Sometimes the change is at the individual level, like changing a person's work method or responsibilities. Sometimes it's at the group or team level, like improving teamwork or coordination. Change can also happen at the department level or organization wide. As the level gets bigger, the change usually becomes more complex. There are more stakeholders, more interdependence, and more coordination needs. This is why planned change models become very useful because they help us manage complexity in a structured way. Now let's connect this to the reason change happens. Organizations change because pressure comes from outside and inside. Externally, you can have competition, technology, economic shifts, regulations, or changing customer expectations. Internally, you can have inefficiency, poor performance, conflict, low morale, or outdated systems. Organizations change to remain effective and to survive. And OD reminds us that sustainable change requires alignment, as in people, processes, and organizational direction should support each other. When only one part changes and the rest stays the same, the organization often returns to old patterns. Now, how do we manage change? Change does not just happen by itself. If leaders do nothing, people will create their own interpretations. And those interpretations can include fear, rumors, and confusion. Managing change requires clarity. So, clarity as to what is changing, why it's changing, and what is expected. Communication matters too, but involvement also matters. When people are involved appropriately, they understand the change better and are more likely to support it. Planning is important because it reduces unnecessary disruption. It helps the organization move from confusion toward coordinated action. Barriers are what make change difficult. Some barriers are individual, like fear of the unknown, habits, or concerns about competence and status. Others are organizational, like rigid structures, poor communication systems, lack of resources, or inconsistent leadership. Sometimes the barrier is not the change itself, but uncertainty and miscommunication. People may not resist change, they may resist confusion. And from an OD perspective, system level barriers matter a lot. So even a good plan can fail if the organization structure, culture, or incentives contradict the change. Now let's shift to planned organizational change. Planned change means the organization does not just react. It deliberately designs change using steps and models. In this approach, change management becomes a disciplined approach, planning what needs to happen, guiding the implementation, and ensuring that change sticks. Planned change frameworks help leaders avoid the most common mistake, and that is choosing solutions too early without understanding the real issue. Before we talk about models, let's clarify what the text means by change. Change is not rare, it is constant. It's part of life, and it shows up in both personal and professional settings. Change happens outside organizations too. So, natural and international events, the physical environment, and shifting social realities, all these affect or cause change in the organization. And inside the organizations, we have change happening in how organizations are structured, how they conduct their work, and so on. This matters because organizations do not operate in isolation. When the world changes, organizations feel pressure to adapt, and that is exactly why change management and OD models exist. Now, what about change management? The text describes it as a systematic approach to dealing with the transition or transformation of an organization's goals, processes, or technologies. Systematic is the key word here. It implies planning and coordination, not improvising. And notice the focus: goals, processes, and technologies. These are major parts of an organization functions. So, change management is about guiding the transition carefully so the organization can move to the new way of working with less confusion, less wasted effort, and more sustained adoption. Next, there are strategies of change in two broad categories. One is evolutionary, and the other is revolutionary. An evolutionary strategy is gradual and incremental, step by step improvements over time. For example, a revolutionary strategy is sudden and drastic. Organization wide changes often used when leaders believe change can no longer be delayed. So the strategy you choose is not only about preference, it depends on urgency, risk, and how much of the organization must shift at the same time. Let's make the distinction more practical. The text describes evolutionary change as typical bottom up, which means it is happening through incremental steps where employees may be involved in decisions and implementation, while top management provides guidance to keep actions aligned with objectives. Revolutionary change, on the other hand, is more top down, more disruptive, and usually comes with greater uncertainty. It can be faster, but it often feels riskier for employees because it can involve major shifts all at once. A helpful way to remember this is evolutionary change often supports learning and adjustment, while revolutionary change creates faster movement but can produce heavier disruption and stress. There are also examples commonly associated with revolutionary change. So, one is re engineering, which is rethinking and redesigning business processes to increase effectiveness, focusing more on processes than on functions. Another is restructuring, which can include eliminating divisions or departments, changing relationships among functions, and sometimes downsizing to reduce operating costs. And then there is innovation, which is developing new goods and services or new operating systems to meet customer needs. Innovation can create a competitive advantage, but it also carries higher uncertainty because outcomes can be unpredictable. Strategy isn't only about how big the change is, it's also about how you gain acceptance. One method is force coercion, where rewards or punishments are used to push acceptance. Another is rational persuasion, also called empirical rational, where acceptance is built through evidence, special knowledge, or logical arguments. Then there is a shared power, which is closely aligned with OD values. This approach involves employees in decision making, uses empowerment, and often leads to deeper, more lasting acceptance because people internalize the change rather than just comply. Now the topic shifts into the theory of planned change. The key idea is that frameworks describe the activities that must take place to initiate and carry out successful organizational change. The text highlights three planned change models. First is Lewin's change model, the action research model, and the positive model. These are not just academic lists, they actually guide real activities, as in, they tell you what you do first, what you do next, and how you create movement toward a desired future state. To connect everything, the topic presents the idea of a general model of planned change, which is a roadmap. Planned change prepares the entire organization or a significant part of it for new goals or new direction. And that direction can involve culture, internal structures, metrics and records, and processes, any key part of how the organization operates. It's also described as a calculated change, initiated to achieve a desirable output or performance, and to make the organization more responsive to internal and external demands. Plan change models are also not identical. Even when models share stages, they can differ in focus. Some emphasize human processes and learning, while others emphasize broader organizational alignment. So when you compare models, look at the differences in their sequence. What is emphasized early versus what is emphasized later, and how strongly the model builds in participation, feedback, and learning. And from an OD perspective, the goal is not to memorize models. The goal is to choose a model that fits the context and supports sustainable adoption. Plan change models help organizations structure the journey of change. So models give us a sequence or logic. Often that sequence includes understanding the situation, planning actions, implementing interventions, and evaluating results. Different models may emphasize different steps, but the goal is similar, and that is to reduce the likelihood of failure, improve coordination, and increase adoption. So, models are not just academic, they are practical tools for navigating complexity. In planned change, stages matter. Early stages require clarity and readiness. So, this is where people need to understand why change is needed. Middle stages require support, coordination, and skill building. Later stages require reinforcement so the change becomes a normal practice. And the risks also differ by stage. So early on, the risk is confusion and lack of buy in. During implementation, the risk is fatigue and inconsistency. Toward the end, the risk is regression or people slipping back to old habits. So effective change leaders adjust their support based on where the organization is in the change process. Now let's focus on resistance to change. So resistance is normal. In OD, we don't treat resistance as a simple stubbornness. Resistance can come from individuals and from the organization itself. At the individual level, resistance may reflect fear of uncertainty, loss of control, loss of status, or concern about competence. At the organizational level, resistance may come from rigid policies, deeply rooted culture, resource limitations, or systems that reward old behavior. So resistance often signals misalignment. It tells us something about the change or the way the change is being managed. It does not fit people's perceptions, needs, or the organization's systems. To overcome resistance, Organizations need more than persuasion. They need practical approaches. First, you should address concerns directly and respectfully. If people fear job loss, pretending that fear doesn't exist will not help. Second, communicate clearly and consistently. Many people resist ambiguity more than change. Third, involve people where possible. Participation improves understanding and ownership. And finally, align systems so new behavior is supported. If the organization says collaboration but rewards only individual competition, the system will defeat the message. So, overcoming resistance is not about forcing people, it's about managing the process well, supporting people through the transition, and aligning the organization to sustain the change.